Hi, I'm Andrew Klavan, and this is Another Kingdom. Be sure to head over to dailywire.com and become a subscriber to get early access to our episodes ad-free. In our last episode, Austin escaped from Riley's apartment, only to find himself back in the eunuch zombie cave of sacrifice, battling a horrific dragon made of human body parts. He fought the beast, and it retreated to fight another day. Austin escaped the cave with the help of a ghost boy who told him how the people of Edgemont had conjured the wizard Curtain to come to their land, and how Curtain had convinced them to murder their women so that raiders would not be attracted to their country and food would be less scarce. At the boy's urging, Austin traveled to a magic pond that healed his wounds. Then, as he leaned into the water to drink, he saw a face on the surface, not his face, and the face spoke to him. And now, Another Kingdom, Episode 4, performed by Michael Knowles.
Yeah! I remarked. I scrambled back from the water's edge. Even the stallion was startled. He leapt sideways to get away from the pond. I mean, what the hell, right? That was supposed to be my reflection, but it wasn't. And whoever it was, he was talking to me. Crouching, afraid, I stared wide-eyed at the pond. The water stirred unnaturally and lifted in a little wave. And in the wave, I saw a hand rising. But then the water and the hand fell down with a splash. A silent second passed. Another. Then, slowly, warily, I crawled back to the edge of the pool. I peered into the still water. The face peered back at me. Not my face. It was the face of a man in his 20s. He had thin, narrow, aesthetic features, the features of a scholar or a saint. He had short black hair and a thin, prominent nose, and sensual, sensitive lips, a poet's lips, a lover's. He looked worn by sorrow and care. I knew at once that this was the man I had heard lamenting. He looked up at me out of the water. He was made of water for all I could tell, at one with the water, inseparable from it. He groaned quietly, a hollow, wavering, liquid sound. "My love," he said. "My love." "Who are you?" I asked him, or tried to ask him. My voice had turned to dust. The thunder rolled above us. Lightning flashed. And when the wind ruffled the water, the man's face disappeared in the ripples. It only formed there again when the water grew still. The man searched the surface, looking for me. Then he saw me, squinted at me as if it was hard to make me out above the pond. "Get away from here," he said in a somber, hollow tone. "Out of the forest, out of Edgemont. Quickly, man, before Curtain finds you and curses you like he did me." At that, I heard a noise behind me. I looked over my shoulder. I saw a boy staring at me. He pulled back quickly behind a tree and disappeared. I faced the pond, faced the face in the pond. Are they his children? Are they Curtain's? He shook his head mournfully. "They're mine. All I could preserve of them." "Are they dead? Are they ghosts?" "No, they were never born." I looked around again, my lips parting. I caught glimpses of the children peeking out from behind the trees, then gone. "Never born," I whispered. I turned back to the man in the pond. "They were all I could save of the women," he told me. "Their children." I understood. The children they didn't live to have. "Run," he moaned. "Run for your life from this terrible place." I will, I promised him. But somehow I couldn't run. Not yet. I needed to know more. I had this sense, this instinct, that it was important for me to hear his story. "Tell me who you are first, then I'll go." "I'm Natani, the magician." "Magician? Is that like a wizard?" "No. It's a learned power. Power over the shapes of things, things seen and unseen. Healing, too. The water, I said. That was you. I am the water now. Is that what you meant about how Curtin cursed you? My love, he lamented in that watery voice. My heart seized in my chest as a whip crack of thunder shook the branches and lightning lit the green dark day. Go, said Natani from the pond. Go now. He's far off, but he senses your presence, just like he sensed mine. He will come for you. I knew he was right. I could feel it. This country belonged to Curtin, and the wizard could feel me here. He was angry, too. His anger was in the storm somehow. Somehow his anger and the storm were one and the same. And the storm was getting closer. I had to get away from it fast. And yet I couldn't. I needed to know more. Tell me what happened to you and I'll go, I said. He moves in the wind, said Natani the magician, speaking from the substance of the water, through the water. In the wind and across dimensions, place to place. That's how he saw us together. You and your love. My love, he echoed. She was so beautiful, and she was mine. The power of my magic fed on her love and grew stronger on it. He hated that. He feared it. So he stole her from me. Curtin. He drew her to a lonesome tower while the purge was going on in the villages. While they were feeding the women to the beast, you mean? He tricked her. That's how his magic works. He tricks his way into your mind and takes it over. I had seen that back in Galliana. Curtin fed his magic on weakness and desire. He used Lady Cata's loneliness, Lady Bethare's jealousy, Lord Iron's ambition to seize control of them. He took power from their minds and turned it against them. He came to her in a shape like a hero's, Natani went on. Handsome and brave and strong. He tricked her into sin. Into sin? You mean she fell in love with him? She was afraid, and I was gone. I should have stayed to protect her, but I went on my quest instead. She was alone in Newfell when the sacrifices began. She escaped into the woods, but Curtin saw her. He drew her to the tower. He told her she'd be safe there, that they would not find her. They would not throw her to the beast in the cave. When, in her fear, she locked the door, he put a spell on the lock, and she was trapped. I shook my head. What an evil bastard. My fault. My fault. I left her alone. I was on my quest, moving through the villages, you see, doing what I could to save the children who would not be born. I gave them shapes and hid their spirits here in the forest, in case any of the women escaped to claim them. Too late, I realized Curtin had seized upon my absence to seduce my love. His pale, aesthetic, poet's face took on a new expression of determination. I saw then what a fool I'd been, how wrong I'd been to leave her. I returned, to find her, to set her free, to take her away to safety across the 11 lands. A thought was teasing at the edges of my brain now. A sin, a quest, a curse. I had heard these words before. Natani continued. I draped myself in shadow so Curtin wouldn't see me. I found the tower. I climbed to her room. I called to her through the door, and she came back to herself, came back to me. Our love made my magic strong again, and the lock was broken. Oh, my love, my love. The wind swirled angrily down from the sky and up from the earth again, carrying the dead leaves in a chattering tornado. Now, when the thunder growled and grumbled, when the lightning flickered and the green-black clouds seethed, I felt the wizard's anger in them. I felt him moving across the dimension of space, coming toward me in the wind, as fast as the wind and twice as terrible. I knew I had to run. I knew I had to get out of the forest. But still I lingered. For a moment then, with the wind making the water seethe, Natani's face disappeared beneath the agitated surface, but I spoke into the ripples anyway. What happened next? And sure enough, his voice came up to me, rippling like the water. As the water grew calm once more, his face reappeared. "We ran," Natani said, "my love and I, into the woods to get away from him, but he was coming, closer and closer on the storm, just as he is coming now. There was no hiding from him, no escape. I tried to cover my darling in magic. I made a mantle of my love for her, but—" His voice broke. "But he had gotten inside her head, and she could not free herself. I couldn't protect her. I knew when he reached us, he would destroy us both. So I did the only thing I could think of." The lightning flickered above the trees, and the thunder crashed so loudly and so angrily that the forest seemed to shake with fear. The wind rushed over us, and I could feel the rain inside it. My stallion stirred and whinnied, as much as to say to me, "Hurry, Austin, hurry! Curtain was near. The storm was about to break." I changed her shape so he wouldn't know her. I used all the power of my magic to turn her into a creature of the woods, so she could slip away, you see, and elude him even as he swept into the forest searching for her. He was speaking quickly now, hoping to finish his story so I could get the hell out of there in time. And I was staring down at him, my mouth open, my mind racing, the thought repeating as he spoke, a thought I couldn't believe and yet couldn't quite deny. A sin, a quest, a curse. "She ran. I made her run. She escaped. I saw her escape. But where? Where did she go? I never knew. I don't know now. I don't know how far or whether she is alive or dead." His voice sank to a watery moan. "And once she was gone, all my magic was gone with her. Alone without my love. I was no match for Curtain. He found me and came into my head and drove me mad. I threw myself into this pond, hoping to drown myself before he used my magic against me, used it to transform me into something abominable. But he would not let me die. He seized on my despair and forced me to change my own shape into the element of water." With that, the lightning flashed, the pond went white, the thunder struck again, so near, so loud, I could hear nothing else for a moment. Then, from the roiling water, the magician's gargling voice cried out to me, "Run, run for your life, run now." But I lingered one more second. A sin, a quest, a curse. I tried to speak. I couldn't. I tried again. I said, "Maud? Was it Maud, my friend, the squirrel girl, Maud?" And from the depths of the now churning pool, Natani's churning voice rose up to me. "Maud, Maud, Maud, my love, my love." The storm broke. The rain fell. The wizard was almost upon me. I had to run for it. I ran. I rushed to my stallion. With my leg now healed, now strong, I stepped quickly into the stirrup and swung myself into the saddle in a single motion. The clouds burst and the rain washed over me in a torrent. The force of the downpour was incredible. It whipped my face. It stung my cheeks and nearly blinded me. Leaves were torn from their branches. They dropped down hard. The thunder cracked again and again, and the great clouds above the treetops flashed blackly with the lightning inside them. Through the hellish noise, I shouted toward the pond. "She lives, magician! She's alive! I've seen her! She sent me on this quest! She sent me, and you healed me, and so help me, I will bring her back to you! I'll find the Emperor! We'll free these countries, and so help me!" But the thunder roared so loudly, and the lightning struck so near, my voice was drowned, and my courage failed, and I dug my heels into the stallion's side and shouted, "Ha!" The last I saw of Natani was a wave lifting wildly on the wild, wild wind, with his hand inside it, as if to bid me go. Then the stallion reared and ran. We dashed through the rain beneath the trees. The leaves swirled up from the ground and slanted out of the sky at once. The wind drove a dark mist between the flailing branches. Through those leaves and through that mist and through the sheets of rain, I saw the never-born children running in terror, fading in and out of being in the tempest-tossed obscurity. I went on, battling my way through the maelstrom. Lightning struck a mighty pine and severed its trunk like the blow of a giant axe. Sparks flew, and the stallion halted and whinnied as the tree toppled over in front of me, its branches flaming. I shouted at the horse again and snapped the reins. The stallion leapt high, and we cleared the fire and rode on. I was searching for the tree line, for a trail, for any way out. But the forest just grew deeper as the storm grew worse. The wind was now so strong, the horse could barely make headway against it. The lightning was striking fast on every side. Flash, flash, one strike after another. All around me, trees were going up in yellow flames, even as the rain washed down and drenched them. Trunks were crashing through the branches, thudding to the ground. Flaming branches were sweeping past my face. Each new obstacle and danger forced me to turn and turn again until I had no idea which direction I was facing, which way I should go to get out of this forest. The rain lashed me. The wind buffeted me. Fire flared around me. "Damn it!" I shouted in frustration, but my voice was swallowed by yet another crash of thunder. Then, for just a moment, the storm lulled, the way storms will, and in the sudden, unnerving quiet, there was the steady whisper of rainfall, and a soft voice calling to me.
We'll get back to the story in a minute. But first, if you'd like to keep watching these great visuals throughout the whole episode and get each episode a full week ahead of everyone else, become a Daily Wire Premium subscriber. You'll get a new chapter every Monday, while the rest of you will have to wait till Friday to find out what happens on Austin's quest. Don't wait till Friday. Subscribe now. As a premium subscriber, you'll be able to watch live episodes of The Ben Shapiro Show, The Michael Knowles Show, The Matt Walsh Show, and me on The Andrew Klavan Show. Read dailywire.com without ads, download our latest ebooks, interact with hosts by writing into the mailbag. It's all ad-free. To continue enjoying these rich visuals and riveting story, you guessed it, become a subscriber over at Daily Wire. Now, back to the story.
"Over here." Desperate, soaking, breathless, I turned and saw a woman standing among the trees. She was wearing a hooded robe, a peasant's robe, but even at a glance, I could see she was not a peasant. Beneath her cowl, she had elegant, lovely features, and red hair spilling out from the rough cloth to fall around her cheeks. The ghosts of unborn children flitted past her and vanished among the trees all around her in the black mist and the gray downpour. She beckoned me urgently with one hand, clutching her robe closed around her with the other. "Hurry, over here." I didn't know what to think. Was she real? Was she friendly? Had I crossed the border out of Edgemont and escaped the wizard's domain? Or was she a creature of his, some sort of demon or illusion? I just didn't know. But the storm was already rising again. The next time the thunder struck, it was so loud it scattered my thoughts. The lightning lanced out of midair and cut another pine in two and sent the pieces flaming to the earth. The wind swirled, full of wet leaves. The leaves and the wind smacked into me and nearly knocked me from my saddle. Squinting through the downpour, I saw the woman beckon me again. She shouted to me, but the noise of the storm swept her words away. I decided I had to trust her. Alone, unguided, I would never get out of this tempest alive. I pulled the reins to point the stallion toward her and spurred the horse on. The motion brought the wind to my back. The wind gave me speed. As soon as the red-haired woman saw me coming, she turned and started hurrying through the forest. I could see she knew the way. Amidst all the massed undergrowth and the fallen wreckage, she moved smoothly and swiftly as on an open path. When I followed in her footsteps, I also passed quickly among the swaying trees. We broke through the tree line into a broad clearing, and there stood a house. Not just a house, a grand mansion, brown and white like the brown-white wood around it. It seemed almost to grow up out of the ground. Stables and gables and bay windows and peaked roofs surrounded by birches and autumn maples lashed by the storm. I pulled up, staring, startled, amazed. Who built such a grand house here? The woman was up ahead of me, running for it. She turned as she went and beckoned again, more urgently. I hesitated only another second. I felt a sourness in my heart, doubt, distrust. Who was she? How had she come to be here? But looking around, I saw the whole forest bending and groaning under the force of the tempest, patches of flame rising and falling here and there as the lightning struck and then struck again. I was going to die if I didn't get shelter. Me and the stallion were both going to die. I rode on, following the woman. She was at the stables now. With an effort, she slid open the large, heavy door. She stood back to let me pass. I rode into the structure, ducking low to clear the lintel. It was a huge relief to come in out of the weather. The stallion shook himself beneath me, throwing off water. I slid out of the saddle, exhausted. If I hadn't been gripping the reins, I think I would have toppled into the hay. Breathing hard, I turned to the woman. She pushed the rain-blackened cowl off her head. My breath caught. I nearly gasped aloud. She was even more beautiful than I had realized at first. So beautiful. Mesmerizing. Her red hair flowed lushly around an oval face of small, neatly sculpted features. Even in the shadows of the stables, I could see her gleaming cobalt eyes, tender and caring and warm. She did not look like anyone I knew, anyone I had ever seen anywhere, and yet there was something about her, something about the kindness and gentleness in her expression that reminded me of someone. I could not place who it was. "Who are you?" I said. "My name is Hamarta." Her voice was also warm, also kind. It seemed to pour over me like a soothing balm. "What is this place?" I asked. "It's all right. You'll be safe here. I'll take care of you until the storm is over. After that, you can make a run for the border." The border. We're still in Edgemont, then. She nodded unhappily. "We are. But he can't find us here, I promise. I'll protect you." He. Curtin. She didn't have to say the name. She gestured toward the black stallion. "Come on now, unsaddle him. I'll brush him down." While I worked the saddle off, she took a brush from a peg on the wall. She stroked the horse dry, murmuring sweetly to him as she worked her way across his flank. I stood in my soggy clothes and watched her. Couldn't take my eyes off her. I was a city boy. I didn't know a thing about horses, but she seemed to wield the brush with a sure hand as she kept whispering to him, "There's a good boy. There's a good boy." She really did remind me of someone, but I still couldn't figure out who. "You seem to know what you're doing," I said. "You've got to get them fluffy again, or they can't get warm." She glanced at me, smiled, a smile like her eyes, like her voice, infinitely gentle, womanly. "Oh, look at you, you poor thing. You look so worried. Don't worry. I'll take care of him. And then," that smile again, "then I'll take care of you. Go fetch a bale of hay so he has something to eat now." There were a few bales stacked against one wall. Not many, I noticed. Why not? Where were the other horses? My black stallion was the only one here. I hoisted a bale and carried it over to the stallion and set it down for him. It made me realize, now that I was well, now that my fever and nausea were gone, how incredibly hungry I was. Hamarta finished the brushing. She hung the brush on the wall again. She wiped her forehead with one wet sleeve. "All right now, sweetheart," she said to me. "Come along. I'll feed you." She flashed another sweet smile and gently patted my cheek. The warmth of her touch went right through me, knife meets hot butter. Then she pulled her hood up over her flowing hair and moved to the door. I stood by the stallion, watching her go, mesmerized by her. Such a beautiful girl, and so kind, almost wifely, almost maternal. "I'll feed you. I'll take care of you, sweetheart." But what was she doing here? A woman in Edgemont where all the women were dead, in this house. Even in crazy Austin is having a hallucination land, there was something about this situation that did not add up. Sliding the stable door open again, Hamarta turned to me, framed against the backdrop of the storm. She saw me hesitating and gave me yet another of those charming smiles. I realized then whom she reminded me of. Jane, my friend, the girl I loved back home, Jane Janeway. It was her smile, her tenderness, her feminine sweetness that seemed to reach out to me from this stranger, that seized my heart here as it always did back in the real world. "Come on then, darling," Hamarta said to me, as if she were coaxing a reluctant child. "It'll be all right. Come on." She pushed out into the rain, and I, mesmerized, trailed after her. The tempest was still running high. The whole forest was seething with wind and rain. The trees around the clearing bent low and slashed up straight again as the fallen leaves tornadoed. The boiling clouds above us exploded over and over with white-black lightning. Clutching her cowl tight around her face, Hamarta raced for the mansion's front door. I raced after her. She went quickly up the 3 front steps, pulled the door open, and hurried inside. Eager to get out of the rain again, I leapt up the steps after her and dashed across the threshold. As I did, just as I was crossing over, I caught one quick glimpse of her, one glimpse of Hamarta standing in the front hall, waiting for me there. Her bright eyes now seemed more bright, weirdly bright, and her sweet smile suddenly struck me as wrong, creepy, and unpleasant. I thought to myself, I've made a terrible mistake. But the next thing I knew, I was through the door, and in the garage at Riley's apartment house, just sliding behind the wheel of Riley's Volkswagen. For a moment, I was too dazed by the transition to understand what the hell was going on. Then I did understand. I was back in Walnut Creek. I was trying to escape. The people in the building were calling the police. For all I knew, in minutes, squad cars would come swarming onto the scene, sirens blaring. I was on the run again. Somehow, dazed as I was, I managed to switch the engine on and snap the Passat's gear shift into reverse. I backed out of Riley's parking spot and swung the car around, tires screeching. Then I rolled forward to the garage door, which rolled open automatically as I came. A moment later, I was out on the street, back in the city, driving past the empty office parks, their towers lit up bright and hollow in the misty night. I wound around them on the broad curving boulevard, then fired like a rock from a slingshot out into the darkness of the side streets. I was heading to Berkeley, to my parents' house, heading home. There was no GPS in the ancient Volks, but it didn't matter. I knew the way from childhood. I left the straight path as soon as I could and traveled on lesser byways. I hoped the police would not guess that I had switched cars, but I couldn't count on it, so it was best to keep out of sight as much as possible. It felt strange to be rolling lonesome through the dark like that. It was hard to process the vastness of my disconnection. No phone, no internet, no media. My isolation was like a hunkering presence, a stone gargoyle glowering on my shoulder. When had I ever been so solitary? I stared through the windshield at the headlit 2-lane. My mind was reeling, images sluicing in and out of memory like scary faces in a carnival horror ride. I saw the storm-tossed woods of Edgemont, the magician's poetic features lamenting in the pool, the monster in the cave, the mansion in the forest. I thought of Hamarta, that last glimpse I'd had of Hamarta's face. A glimpse is all it was. It had lasted less than a second, but in that flash, she seemed to me, what was the word I wanted? Malevolent. Yes. Had I imagined that? Had I mistaken what I saw? Or was that the truth about her? Was she some creature sent by the wizard Curtain to draw me into a trap, as he had drawn Maud to the prison tower where he locked her away? Maud. That was the next thought that came to me. Maud, the mutant squirrel girl, my friend. It was strange to think of that stern, unruly creature as fully a woman, and a woman in love with such a pale, poetic type as Natani. I wondered if I would really be able to keep my promise to him, to find some way to bring them back together. I tried to think it through as I guided the Passat through the California darkness. But, as always, when I was back here in modernity, I found it almost impossible to fully believe in that other semi-medieval fantasy novel world. Curses, spells, wizards who wormed their way into your will. They were so real when I was fighting them for my life. But once I was back in a car, on a modern byway, well, how the hell was I supposed to think of them as anything but crazy dreams? Maybe that's why my fears about Hamarta and my worries about Maud faded as I was driving, fell away from me like a shed skin. After all, here I was on a lonely road, winding up from the depths of a deserted canyon. And as I crested the ridge, I looked out through the window, through the trees, and saw the familiar lights of Oakland spread out below me, and my mind just naturally returned to the troubles at hand. Billiard ball dead and my crazy sister missing and my entire family conspiring with Serge Orozco to do I didn't even know what. Reality. What a depressing thought. I so did not want to be doing this. I did not want to go home and see my parents, not at all. It was bad enough back in the old days, last week, when I only had to contend with their disdain for my artistic ambitions, when I only had to swallow my envy at their worshipful admiration of my successful older brother. Bad enough then, but now? Now, when it turned out that they and my brother, all three, were agents of a lunatic billionaire who killed anyone who got in his way, who was trying to kill me, their own son, and Riley, their only daughter? Not that they cared. My right hand moved to my throat, went into my shirt, touched the locket around my neck. My fingers brushed the gold and felt the warm energy coming off the surface of the metal. But I didn't need any magic to remind me of Riley. Little Riley as a child. Her hysterical, frightened cries from her bedroom, and how no one went to her, no one but me. Which made me think of my mother. It made me think about her prim, bloodless lips, and her passionless eyes, and her dry, intellectual drawl. Trading academic patter with Dad and Richard while Riley cried. Oh, go see about Riley, Austin, would you? A word of tenderness in that woman's mouth would have died of loneliness. Which made me think, in turn, about Jane Janeway, about the passion I'd felt for her back in L.A., the passion I still felt for her whenever I was calm enough to feel anything at all besides fear. My desire for Jane wasn't some pale, polite, tepid, modern yearning, no. It was more than her company I wanted, more than her body, more than sex and even love, though God knows I wanted all that too. But when I thought of Jane, really thought of her, I wanted to reach right through her flesh and grab the soul of her, drag her to me by her soul, and press my soul into hers, lips first. I wanted to plant my children inside her like founding a city on fertile soil. You know how feminists used to complain that men wanted to keep women barefoot and pregnant? Well, hell, I was willing to let Jane have shoes, I guess, but other than that, I wanted our children falling out of her like fruit from a tree. That's how I felt, and to hell with anyone who didn't like it. I could see a whole future with her, daydream the whole thing from our wedding day to my funeral. But now as I drove, I began to doubt myself, to doubt even my own desires. Which brought me back to Hamarda, her womanly sweetness, her maternal kindness, so like Jane's. How quickly she had hypnotized me, drawn me in. Was it like that with Jane too? Had a childhood with such an unmotherly mother simply left me so hungry for feminine care that it was as if I had a yearning ghost inside me, a spirit boy like in the children's forest, desperate to be brought to life by the first motherly maiden who came along? Riley's Volkswagen curled down out of the night hills, and I finally joined up with the freeway, coming into the bright cities from the south. It was after midnight now. Not much traffic. I skirted the campus on Shattuck Avenue and climbed into the wooded hills of the north side until I arrived at my parents' house. I will say this for Mom and Dad. Whatever dastardly deeds they'd been doing for Sir Jarosco, they hadn't got rich off them, not so far as I could see anyway. Their house was the same odd and ramshackle place where we had lived when I was growing up. Big, husky, weather-worn. A rambling storybook illustration of a place with lots of shingled roofs and fanciful curves and hidden crannies, even a sweeping stone staircase that rose from the lawn to a stunted tower. It was set back from the steeply climbing, sharply winding road amidst a cluster of drooping beech trees and stunted redwoods, all of them turned to eerie silhouettes by the night. I pulled into the driveway and shut off the engine. The house was quiet, dark. Either my parents were still down in Los Angeles or they were asleep. Asleep, I wagered, seeing their Mini was in the garage. I stepped out of the Volks into the night. I stood and breathed the fresh, cool air and listened to an owl woo-wooing somewhere in the nearby trees. I scanned the street. No sign of cops. Changing cars, covering my tracks, I'd lost them. I supposed it was possible they'd think to look for me here. Hell, it was possible my folks would turn me in if they saw me. But I didn't plan to stay that long. I didn't know what Riley had left for me here. I didn't even really know if she had left anything. But if she had, I knew where I would find it. I trudged reluctantly up the rising front path. I was in no hurry to step back into my childhood home. I never had been, but especially not now that I knew what I knew. I approached a redwood on the sloping front lawn. The spare key was still there in the water tray beneath the humming bird feeder. I used it to let myself in the side door and entered the kitchen. I turned off the alarm by poking my brother's birth date into the keypad. I stood in the darkness. Even the smell of the place depressed me. The smell of my past, I'd never liked it. Had I always known what was going on here? Had I always been aware, deep down, that something in this house was terribly wrong? I knew I ought to start searching right away, but I suddenly realized again how hungry I was. Very hungry, just as I had been back in Edgemont. I checked the refrigerator, typically austere parental fare. I slapped together a sandwich of cheese and artisanal bread, plus some sort of brown relish for flavor. I sat at the kitchen table in the shadows and chomped on it. My brain kept telling me I ought to hurry. I ought to search the place and get out before I was discovered. But much as I disliked this house, it was home. I was comfortable here. I was losing my sense of urgency. When I was done eating, I dusted the crumbs from my hands and stood up. I swayed, unsteady on my feet, touching my forehead, closing my eyes. Man, I was tired. I trudged out of the kitchen into the living room. A pleasant room. I could make it out in the shadows. Lots of warm wood and floral furniture. Like the rest of the house, it had the homey but manufactured charm of a country inn. From there, I slowly climbed the stairs to the shabby hall off the second-floor landing. I meant to head straight to Riley's room. I did, but as I shuffled along the burgundy runner, I reached my own boyhood cubicle and paused in the doorway. There was my old bed in the shadows, inviting. I was so tired, and this was home. If I could just lie down for a few minutes, not to sleep, just to rest. Fully dressed, I settled on my back on top of the bedspread, my hands folded on my chest like a corpse. My gaze moved over the dark walls. Oh, don't think for a moment the room had been tenderly preserved to remind my parents of my treasured childhood. Ha! The sci-fi movie posters had been stripped from the walls, the superhero models swept from their shelves. It was now a spare, mostly bare, and yet somehow pretentious little guest room decorated with wan prints of, I don't know, Provence or some similarly fashionable place. Nostalgic misery settled over me like the darkness. Another second, and I was fast asleep. I shot up, awake, thinking, shit. It was morning, white sunlight streaming in through the window. What had wakened me? My mother. Shit. She'd been holding the door slightly ajar, peeking in on me, silent. I had seen her through half-opened eyes, just for a second. The look on her face, like Hamarta's look, malevolent. Then she'd withdrawn and shut the door again. Shit. Quickly, I rolled my legs off the bed and sat up on the edge of the saggy mattress. I rubbed my fingers through my hair and shook my head, doing my best to bring myself to full alertness. All right, I thought, trying to calm myself. All right. There was no seizing back the lost time. I just had to stay solid inside. Do my thing and get out of here. Keep chill. Chilly. Chilliest. Shit, I thought. I got up. I remembered. The last time I'd been here, about 3 months before, I'd left a change of clothes. I'm not sure why. Maybe just to remind my parents I existed. When I checked the bottom drawer of the bureau, the clothes were still there. Fast as I could, I changed into them. It was nice to get into some fresh underwear, jeans and a sweatshirt. I left the bloody old clothes in their place. As I was walking downstairs, I heard my parents talking to one another in the kitchen. Murmuring to one another is more like it. And the tone of their voices sent the proverbial icy finger up my proverbial spine. It was nothing I could describe exactly, nothing I could really give a name to. But I can say this. Theirs was not an, "Oh joy, our darling son is home" sort of murmur. More like, "Oh crap, what are we going to do now?" Well, what else could I expect? The last time I'd seen the dear Rents, just a couple of days ago down in L.A., they'd been telling me why I had to lie to the police and cover up Orozco's murders for him. They were all too disappointed when I refused, and they seemed perfectly gratified to listen to Richard threaten me with the destruction of my life and reputation and what I'll laughingly call my career. So I couldn't exactly hope they were going to be thrilled to see me. Still, you know how it is. Mom, Dad, all that. You always keep hoping for a little love and approval from them, even when you know better. Even when you're pretty sure they're conspiring with a power-mad lunatic to destroy the known universe, or whatever the hell they were conspiring to do. They must have heard me coming, because they shut down their conversation about 2 seconds before I pushed through the swinging door. Well, muttered my father as I walked in. What have we here? He was an owlish man with close-cropped salt and pepper hair, narrow glasses, and a distracted gaze. "What a nice surprise," said my mother. She was angular where she existed in fleshly form at all. It was the worst imitation of a parental welcome I'd ever heard, and I'd heard more than my share. My father had been reading something on his device before I entered. I caught the word, motel, and knew that Billiard Ball's death had made the news. Dad quickly pressed the button to make the screen go blank. Then, just as quickly, he raised his coffee cup to his lips and sipped innocently, smiling thinly around the rim. The silence then was so awkward it was nigh on unbearable. I busied myself by going to the coffee machine and pouring a steaming mugful. Behind me, my father finally came up with something vaguely father-like to say. "So, what brings you up this way?" I turned to him and leaned against the kitchen counter. Beams of morning sun were shooting in through the window above the sink, and if you had taken a picture of us just then, Mom and Dad at the table, me sipping Joe, the bright yellow daisies on the walls and the message magnets on the fridge, you would have captured us looking exactly like the happy, all-American family we had never been. I snorted into my coffee. What brings me up this way? How about the fact that my little sister is missing? Your daughter, Riley. Remember her? "Oh," said my mother with a little frown. "I hardly think she's missing, Austin. Don't be so dramatic." "Drama never helps anything," my father muttered, as if musing to himself. He was a musing mutterer, my father was. "Okay, so she's not missing," I said. "Let's just say her own boyfriend doesn't know where she is." "Well, Marco," said my mother, rolling her eyes. "Her videos have vanished from the internet." "Those videos," said my mother, rolling her eyes. "Her apartment's been ransacked, and the last time I heard from her, she was afraid for her life." "Ransacked," said my mother, rolling her eyes. "I wish you wouldn't use overblown words and phrases like ransacked. Afraid for her life. Really, Austin." "Drama, drama," my father said in a sing-song mutter. He wagged his finger at me. Then Dad sipped his coffee, and Mom stirred her tea, and the silence was unbearably awkward again. Who the hell were these people? I asked myself. I mean, really, were they inhuman monsters willing to let their cult leader slaughter their own children in order to bring about the Orozco Age, as he called it? Were we nothing compared to that bastard's utopia? There were plenty of things I thought of asking them then, plenty of information I would have liked to know. For instance, Orozco had told me a strange, dreamlike tale about a cowled man who had sat with him through the night in his dacha back in Russia many years ago. Somehow, in Orozco's mind at least, he had made some kind of deal with Cowl Guy, and now Cowl Guy had shown up to collect his end of the bargain. Orozco needed to find the manuscript Another Kingdom or suffer some sort of consequence. That was the gist of the story anyway, as far as I could make it out. It was all pretty unclear. Did my parents know anything about this? Did it refer to anything real, or was it just an old psychopath's paranoid fantasy? I would have liked to ask, but somehow I couldn't get the words out. I didn't have the energy to stand there listening to them lie and mumble vague inanities that trailed off into another awkward silence just like this one. What was the point? I cut my losses, took one more slug of coffee, then set the mug on the counter with a clunk. "Well?" I said. "Going so soon?" said my father, hopefully. "Let me just wash up and I'll be gone," I said. The rents exchanged an unreadable look at that. "Well, I should probably head up to my study and do some work then," my father muttered. But he didn't move. And my mother said, "Yes, I really must write some emails." But she didn't move either. So I moved. "Well?" I said. Then I walked out of the kitchen to search the damned house. I went straight to my sister's bedroom. Her presence, like mine, had been all but erased from the childhood manse. Her room, like mine, like every room, had been scrubbed of personality and redecorated with the homey but faceless charm of a bed and breakfast. The only original furniture that remained was her bed and the old bureau with its big mirror on the wall opposite. I peeked under the bed and rummaged briefly through the bureau drawers, but I knew there would be nothing there, and I knew exactly where to look next. When she was little, Riley had had the odd habit of climbing into the odd house's odd storage closets and crawl spaces. She would go in there with a doll or by herself and do I never knew what, and eventually, unnervingly, reappear in a different room, because some of the spaces were connected to some of the others through vents and such. I'd gone into one of these passages once to see what the attraction was, but it was dusty and cramped and unpleasant and made me claustrophobic, so I never really explored the whole network. Anyway, as Riley got older, she stopped going in as well. I knew there was a nook in her closet, so I started there. I opened the door and found that my mother had appropriated the space for her own use. A lot of her old dinner party dresses were hanging from the rod. As I pushed through them to the back, I caught the musty smell of her clinging to the cloth. The smell of Mom, it surrounded me. And yes, if you want to know, it made my heart hurt. All those warm memories I didn't have of a childhood I had never lived came back to me as if they were more than mere longing. On the other side of Mom's dresses, at the back of the closet, down low, there was a little storage nook about the size of a suitcase. I got on my knees, then down on my stomach and squirmed in. Sure enough, at the back, there was a narrow passage into the wall. I stuck my head in, then my hand. Then, grunting, I drew in the rest of me. It was as I remembered, unpleasant, claustrophobic. I could just barely squeeze my shoulders through the gap, and I had an immediate, panicky urge to squeeze right out again, if only to make sure I wasn't going to be stuck in there forever. But by the light filtering in from behind me, I could see that the passage went on quite a way, and I thought, if Riley really had left something for me, if I wasn't desperately kidding myself, this would have been the place for her to hide it. So on I slithered. It felt like being back in the mousehole passage out of the monster's lair in Edgemont, fighting through the cramped corridor, sweating, grunting with exertion, breathlessly frightened of getting stuck. In a few more yards, I reached a crossroads where an air duct intersected with the crawl space. The duct was larger, and it had vents that let in air and light, which was a relief. With an effort, I craned my neck. I looked down the duct one way and then the other. And I'll be damned. There it was. There was a flat, I didn't know what, lying on the duct floor near the second vent. The sight of it made my pulse quicken because, whatever it was, it seemed to have been positioned intentionally, close to Riley's room, in a lit spot that made it easy to see. Riley had placed this thing where I might find it, but where no one else ever would. It was no easy business to maneuver my body around the corner into the duct, but I managed it. I crawled to the second vent and picked up the package. It was an old DVD case, ancient, Jurassic. On the cover, there was a fuzzy picture of a haunted house silhouetted against a full moon and a tree branch. Horror Mansion, that was the title. Some low-budget piece of crap, obviously. I snapped the case open. The DVD was still inside, and Riley, or someone, had scrawled some numbers on the shiny surface with a marker, a phone number. I paused there a moment, thinking. Horror Mansion. The title seemed vaguely familiar. I felt I had seen the movie once, a long time ago. In fact, a scene came into my head. A small bedroom, a shelf, a lantern, a dead bird. That was all I could remember. If this was the clue Riley had left for me, I could not for the life of me fathom what it meant. I had an idea then. I thought maybe I should touch the locket around my neck. It had reminded me of that night Riley was crying hysterically in her bed. That had led me to the book in her apartment. So maybe now it would remind me why I knew this movie, why Riley might have left it here. My hand moved to my throat, but before I touched the locket, something happened. I heard something. Voices. My parents. Well, this was weird. Extremely weird. I was upstairs. The vent looked out on the second-floor landing. I was pretty sure my parents were nowhere nearby. They had both said they were going to do some work. My father's study was in the queer little tower part of the house, and my mother's was down the hall from the kitchen. And yet, this is the weird part, their voices were as clear to me as if they were standing right next to me, speaking in my ear. It was one of those oral tricks. You know, the air duct, this part of the air duct, was in one of those hot spots where sound congregates from all over. It occurred to me that that explained why, when she was little, Riley always seemed to know stuff she wasn't supposed to know. She could climb in here and listen to us talking wherever we were. It's no use pretending there's a decision to make, my mother said. And this was also weird. Her voice was different than it usually was, less vague, more sharp, more certain. All the decisions were made long ago, Charles. It's the consequence we're dealing with now, that's all. And isn't that what a decision is, really, when you think about it? It's a commitment to the consequences. No doubt, my father muttered. He sounded the same as always, distant, musing. I was just remarking on the difficulty of it, that's all. Oh, I know. We're not unfeeling. Austin's a dear, dreamy fellow in his way, and we are his parents. Yes, there's all that. But I meant the wait more than anything. Oh, well, the wait, yes. Waiting is always the worst part of everything, isn't it? But it won't be long. They should be here any minute. It's best this way, likely. Of course it is. We've worked so hard. The boy's going to get himself killed if he keeps on like this. In response, my mother just said, Now, by the time I got to that I was already plenty scared, but that really terrified me. I mean, the moment I heard my mother talking about what a dear, dreamy fellow I was, I understood that both of them, had sold me out. They had called Orozco's minions to tell them I was here. That phrase, they should be here any minute, that told me exactly how little time I had to get the hell out of there before the thugs arrived. But when my father said I was likely to get myself killed, and when my mother answered with nothing but that the impression I got was that dear old Mom knew something about what was going to happen next, something that dear old Dad hadn't quite figured out yet. Dear old Dad may have been in denial, but it was pretty obvious that dear old Mom knew the truth. Namely, dear old me was about to go missing for good. So much for coming home. Time to hit the road. I stuffed the DVD box into my waistband. The duct was too narrow for me to turn around in, and backing up seemed too slow, so I crawled forward, hoping to find an exit up ahead. I did find one, but not soon enough. I scrambled along the duct to the end of the landing, took a tight turn there into an empty storage space. In the empty storage space, I found a trap door. I pushed the trap door and it creaked open a crack. I was able to work my feet around and press them down and kick the trap open the whole way. I lowered myself to the landing. The second my feet touched the floor, I took off, running. I reached the stairs and grabbed the newel, swung myself around and went thundering down. But the moment I reached the living room, I knew my time was up. Through a window onto the front of the house, I saw a great big dark blue Cadillac Escalade pull to the curb and stop. As I peered out, two large men exited the car, one from each front door. It was the driver who caught my attention. Yeah, he was a bad man, a dangerous man. I could see it at a glance. His whole bearing spoke of competence, professionalism, and a blithe indifference to human suffering. The way he walked, the little smile on his lips, the way he casually pulled his jacket shut and buttoned it to hide the gun in the holster on his belt. Everything about him told me he had done terrible things and done them well and done them for a living. Slick, I named him in my mind, because that's what he was. Tall, lean, fit, with a long, cruel, handsome face. His sandy hair was combed back, but dry, as if the wind were blowing it. His suit was blue like his Cadillac, and his tie was red like blood. He wore tinted glasses, but not dark. You could see his eyes through them. They were witty eyes, but mean. The guy with him was black, mustached, broad-shouldered, tall and thick like a football player. He was the muscle. It was Slick who would do the thinking for both of them. They hadn't parked in the driveway, so if I could get to Riley's Volks, I might still be able to escape. I'd have to run out the back door and sneak around to the front, but with a little luck, I might pull it off. I dashed to the back of the room. Just as I reached the archway at the far end, I heard the rap at the kitchen door, metal against glass, a ringed finger rapping the door's sidelight. Slick was knocking. "Coming!" my mother sang out casually as she went to open the door for my executioner. That casual sing-song tone of hers, it went into me like a dagger. My mother! Dazed with the implications, I left the living room and stumbled down a single stair into a mudroom. The mudroom door led to the backyard. I seized hold of the knob and ripped the door open. And I let out a strangled curse and froze. Because there, wavery through a fantastical haze, there was Hamarta waiting for me in the foyer of the mansion in the forest of Edgemont, waiting with that strangely bright smile that had made me believe she was luring me into a trap. Behind me, I heard my mother open the kitchen door for my murderer.
Next time on Another Kingdom.
I heard the kitchen door close. The assassin was inside the house, and still I stood there between the two worlds. Edgemond and its dangers were crowding in on my reeling consciousness now. The storm in the forest, the heavy atmosphere of evil, my sense that the wizard Curtain was rushing to the scene to destroy me, my growing suspicion that Hamarta was luring me into Curtain's trap. It all came back to me. And at the same time, footsteps, the killer coming. If he found me, I would vanish without a trace.
This has been Another Kingdom by Andrew Klavan, performed by Michael Knowles. This episode directed and produced by Jonathan Hay, produced by Mathis Glover, executive producer Jeremy Boring, associate producer Austin Stevens, edited by Jim Nickel, audio recorded by Mike Cormina, sound design and mix by Dylan Case, music composed by Adrian Seeley, hair, makeup, and wardrobe by Jesua Alvera, DIT by Scott Key, and our production assistant is Colton Haas. Visual supervisor, Jake Jackson. Lead illustrator, Rebecca Shapiro. Illustrations by Anthony Clark. Animations by Alvin Tyner, Cole Holloway, and Yi-Han Su. Another Kingdom is a Daily Wire Forward Publishing production. Forward Publishing, 2018.